When Archer started back in 2009, we don't think anyone expected it to run for as long, nor take all the chances that it has. It's been a wild ride so far, and we doubt that it's going to settle down anytime soon. But can you think of a more violent cartoon? We certainly can't.
I have breast cancer.
Breast cancer.
With interrogations, licenses to kill, and countless rampages, Archer is one of the bloodiest and most graphic shows allowed on television. Hi, I'm Kifinosi from Wicked Binge, and today we'll be ranking Archer moments from gruesome to most gruesome. For this list, we'll be picking from Archer moments from across the series to look at which ones made us cringe the most. We have them broken up into 3 categories: the gross, the gory, and the truly gruesome. Each category covers different kinds of hard to watch. Since there are a handful of violent things in each episode across 12 seasons, obviously we won't be covering everything. We have, however, done our best to select a wide variety of moments to cover the different kinds of gore and grossness. Each moment will escalate to be a bit worse within its tier. We've taken into consideration the following factors: how painful it is for the character, how gross it is for us to look at, and how much of an impression it left with audiences. With all that said, let's get ready to rampage! First up, we have the gross. These are survivable injuries that still make us cringe to watch. It's not like Archer has ever held much back, after all. Nope, phrasing. First up is the cancer x-ray. We're starting it with a very tame entry here to help ease you in. They're not always going to be this easy, so enjoy it while it lasts. In the second season of Archer, Sterling is diagnosed with breast cancer. You might remember that arc more for Sterling's character growth, or lack thereof during his recovery, but we remember it for one of the most startling depictions of a cancerous growth we've ever seen on television. We are putting it at the bottom of the list because the moment itself wasn't painful to anyone, but we are willing to bet your jaw dropped a little when you saw this episode for the first time. Following that is Lana's dry hands. Another fine offering from season 2, this episode sees Lana and Archer in the swamp for a mission. The pair gets stranded after their airboat breaks down. Luckily, they have supplies. Unluckily, Archer packed the supplies. When Lana reaches into the cooler, Sterling is not quick enough to warn her that it's not ice in there, but rather dry ice. She screams in pain, and when she pulls her hands out, they're red, steaming, and covered in bits of dry ice that have attached themselves directly to her skin.
How you doing, buddy?
The clip is fleeting and it's not nearly as graphic as what faithful audiences may be used to, but the excellent voice work from Aisha Tyler says it all. Cheryl graces our list for our next moment, cauterization. What starts out as an attempt to help raise family quickly turns into a shootout, as do so many missions on this show. Cheryl is given the important task of cauterizing any gunshot wounds, but maybe they should have been a little more specific. Randy's wife gets a small scratch on her arm, only to then be burned by a poker-wielding Cheryl. The quote-unquote cauterization of the injury was far worse than the wound itself, and we were not at all comforted by Cheryl's maniacal laughter that followed. Next up is throwing star to the shoulder. We don't want to spoil the rest of our video here, but you should probably get used to the idea that Sterling is gonna be on this list a lot. In season 2, episode 6, he goes to help Cyril clean up a mess only to find himself in a battle with 2 gorgeous twin ninjas. Only Sterling, huh? Unfortunately, they're not just there to be eye candy, and the ensuing fight gets violent quickly. Cyril takes care of destroying the ISIS files that were stolen, while Archer takes a throwing star right to the shoulder. The blood, mixed with the fact that he has to push deeper against the blade to continue fighting, make this none too pleasant to watch.
All right, Archer. You win this round.
Following that is Cyril's black eye. Honestly, any of the black eyes on this show would have qualified. When there's so much hand-to-hand combat in a series, there's bound to be a lot of injuries. One thing that we love about Archer is that it takes a more realistic approach to recovery, in lieu of the cartoonish cliche that all the characters are magically healed in the next scene. The downside of this, of course, is that we're left with a lot of gruesome injuries to look at. One of the best and earliest examples of this was way back in season 1, where Cyril gets punched in the face. We don't get to see the moment where Lana finally snaps and punches him, but the next shot opens on a close-up of the wound. The flesh is purple and swollen 360 degrees around the bloodshot eyeball. We can also see the little red scratches in the area. We will hand it to the animators here, they certainly know how to make a cartoon injury look genuinely painful. While there were an assortment of black eyes in subsequent seasons, this close-up shot of Cyril really showcases their talent. Next up would be Pam's allergies. In Season 4, we're introduced to Cheryl's brother Cecil. He and his girlfriend hire the agency and provide them with a vegan soy buffet of imitation seafood. Unfortunately for Pam, she's allergic. Even worse, the spread apparently tastes pretty good because she keeps eating it despite the increasing swelling of her entire body. By the time they get her to stop, she's so red and puffy that it hurts to look right at her. The changes to her voice really help to sell the pain that she's in as she eventually stops being able to breathe properly or communicate. Sterling pops up on the list again for his beanbag bruise. While black eyes were already mentioned on the list, bruises make up another key way in which we see the aftermath of big fights. We don't think there were any bruises as hard to stomach as the one left on Sterling after he takes a shot from Slater's beanbag gun. The pain was so bad that he apparently thought he was dying, or in his own words, "They done killed ol' Rando." Luckily he wasn't dead, and we don't think any of his ribs were actually broken despite his claims to the contrary, but the massive discoloration over his chest and abdomen served as a constant reminder for just how dangerous a beanbag can be. Rounding out the gross tier is broken glass in Archer's feet. We return to the second season of Archer again for this loving nod to Die Hard. While running from KGB agents in Russia, Archer has to finish his escape with no shoes. Considering the building he's running through is covered in broken glass, the pain of this chase cannot be understated. There are so many gruesome details in here. Seeing the glass, hearing it crunch, the bloody footprints that he's leaving behind. The most gruesome moment of this ordeal, however, has to go to when he pours the vodka directly over the broken shards still in his foot. We get to see the blood washed away, watered down, and then immediately seep back over his feet from the various puncture wounds. They really went above and beyond in making this moment as cringeworthy for the audience as they could. We move now into the gory. This is a tier for the quick deaths, loss of limb, and upsetting post-mortem scenes. While these sections are undoubtedly brutal, they're usually over before we have time to pout. Kicking off this tier is car accident in Monaco. Archer, Ray, and Lana find themselves on a mission in Monaco during the Grand Prix. Archer has checked in all the money that they need to pay for a disc so that he can get his own room for free with full amenities. Like nearly all of his decisions, this leads to a life or death car chase, the conclusion of which is the death of a man who stole the money. Benoit balls. The death is probably pretty quick based on the speed of the collision, but the explosive nature of the crash means that it was none too pretty to look at, unless you're Cheryl, probably.
Guess that's it for Le Chouf and Benoit.
Balls.
Following that is the disposal of the Italian Prime Minister. Mallory Archer murders the Prime Minister of Italy for scorning her decades previously. The woman can hold a grudge. She can also stage a pretty convincing break-in. Despite the fact that the Prime Minister was bound to a chair and shot several times, Mallory is able to convince her crew, at least partially, that there was a third party involved.
Someone broke in here and shot him!
She does this by shooting herself in the arm to garner sympathy and lend credibility to her story. Once they tentatively believe the tale about the break-in, they are more inclined to help her dispose of the body. If the death wasn't gruesome enough, and we'd argue that it was one of the grislier deaths by gunshot in the show, then the disposal of the body most certainly is. It's a mystery how they're going to discreetly pull off getting the corpse out of the house, but leave it to Krager to make it gross. He drains the body of its blood, chops it up into little segments, and wraps them up in butcher paper so everyone can take a piece to dispose of in different trash cans. It's a pretty morbid parting gift from a very unusual dinner party. Up next is when Brett eventually dies. The running gag of Brett being shot was only ever going to go one way in the end, him dying via gunshot. In the premiere of Season 5, Brett takes a headshot.
Well, he died doing what he loved. Getting shot.
We'd argue that it wasn't actually that gruesome in comparison to his previous bullet wounds and injuries. He's bled a lot in the office, and with the exception of this injury, they were all drawn out, painful experiences. Many of them involved pools of his blood and a joke from Sterling. We are including this moment not because it's Brett's most gruesome moment, however, but because we think it's the best representation of a quick gun death, which the show is full of. There are tons of quick shootings that could have just as easily been our selection here, but this one offers a clean animation of a bullet right to the brain. While we're praising the animators again, let's talk about our next moment. Conway's hand is ripped off. Conway Stern is happy to place himself in the role of a traitor and villain. That doesn't mean he deserves to have his hand torn clean off. This scene is actually repeated during his next visit. His other hand is torn from his body after he backstabs the CIA. who previously hired him to backstab Archer. The third and final time we see Conway, he loses a foot as well. This man just cannot seem to keep track of his limbs.
You have got to be kidding me!
While all 3 instances of this bodily harm were gruesome, we don't think any were animated in such disgusting detail as the first hand he loses back in season 1. And speaking of hands, normally we would think it repugnant to put 2 hand losses back to back, but I think our next moment garners its own spot. Ray versus the carnivorous plant. A mission from the CIA puts Ray in a conservatory with the second largest collection of carnivorous plants, and he doesn't leave in one piece. There are a few things we feel make this scene harder to watch than the scenes with Conway. One is that we're rooting for Ray. He's part of the core group and not someone who's just there to backstab the agency. Another is where the break happens. See, where Conway's hands seem to be lost right at the wrist as a result of the briefcase he's handcuffed himself to, Ray's injury is much closer to the elbow. This makes it look more gruesome upon initially seeing it. Then the shot lingers and we get to see the bone protruding from the center of the ragged stump as the blood continues to spurt out. Gosh. Next up is the pirate's head through a window. While this might not have been the most memorable scene, it had a little bit of everything we'd want from a gruesome Archer moment. It involved a bloody hand-to-hand combat scene, a swarm of pirates, and concludes with a quick death. The pirate's head is shoved right through the window. There are splinters of glass everywhere and a healthy helping of blood besides. Even if the death itself was too quick to be painful, having seen it, we don't think we'd want to go out that way if given the choice. Following that is Cyril's struggles in Bloody Body. For the most part, we'd seen everything there was to see by the time we got to the 7th season of Archer. Fans have become almost as desensitized to this cartoon violence as the agents themselves. You may notice that a lot of the moments on this list have come from the earlier seasons of the show, when the bloody animation was still shocking and fresh, but this entry just couldn't be left off. In this episode, Archer's in charge of driving the getaway car, while Cyril is left to grab the money they need from a safe. Unfortunately, Cyril is scared, and there's a dead body by the safe that a panicky Mr. Figgis needs to reach over. Though he doesn't reach over the corpse so much as flops around in it, getting blood all over himself and everything else in the process. The longer the scene goes on, the more upsetting it seems to get.
Seriously? That must be so sticky.
Rounding out the gory tier with a bombastic finish is deminiaturization. Our last entry in this category is made all the more impressive by the standard for gore that the season 6 finale set. In this episode, Archer and the gang engage in a famous cartoon trope, becoming miniaturized and put into a person. The Simpsons did it, Futurama did it, Rick and Morty did it, and it's almost always gross. The entire episode is filled with gory moments as it is set inside of a human being, and you know Archer is never one to hold back on the gore nor realism in their art department. The kicker here, however, and the moment we've chosen for our list, is when their hour of being tiny concludes and the ship has not yet been removed from the patient. This results in a huge explosion of viscera as the doctor they were trying to save turns into nothing more than a red stain in what is left of his laboratory.
Guess we didn't make it.
And finally, we have the truly gruesome. This section is filled with the slowest deaths, most brutal beatings, torture scenes, and of course, some rampaging. First up from this tier is Archer being choked. There are many instances of Archer and his compatriots being tortured in the show that we don't get to see. Archer himself is waterboarded off screen, and we can tell from his traumatized face that the experience was horrific. Lana and Slater confirmed that this sort of torture is standard for operatives at their level, meaning that they've likely all gone through it. While we don't get to see any of the waterboarding, admittedly, thankfully, we are treated to an excruciating scene where Archer struggles to breathe. This entry comes from Season 8, also known as Archer Dreamland. One thing we know about Archer's coma is that it's very lifelike, and one thing we know about Archer's life is that it's very violent. This is proven when, in his coma dream, he is violently choked for nearly 2 minutes. After making a mess of what should have been an easy job, Mother's crony grabs Archer by the neck. He chokes and sputters as his face gets increasingly red, then purple, all the while trying to communicate what happened. One eye is swollen shut from a previous injury, but the other is bulging as he struggles to breathe. This goes on for 1 minute and 42 seconds. We timed it. It felt a lot longer though, and we can only imagine what it felt like for Archer. Following that is when Shane eats the former president. We knew that Archer's obsession with big cats was bound to backfire eventually. Charlene talks him into visiting a zoo during their getaway with the former president/dictator, It doesn't take long for them to find a tiger. But Charlene is crazy. This, of course, means that after agreeing the tiger is a total Shane, she releases him in the hopes of bringing him along. Archer barely has time to warn her of what a terrible idea this is before Shane is out and ripping their third party member to shreds. It isn't so bad at first, but when we cut back to the scene, we see that Shane has the former president's head in his mouth. His neck breaks, is torn away, and through all the blood, we get to see something that looks suspiciously like a spinal cord before the corpse is dragged off. You would think that someone that owns an ocelot would know to be more careful, but I guess we can chalk it up to Shane just not being as well behaved as Babu. Next is when we see Barry's insides. There was a long period of the show where we knew Barry was a cyborg, but not exactly how cybernetic he was. Bulletproof? Sure. Super speed? Sure. Super strength? Well, definitely. But it seems like he could also feel pain, and there was little denying that he looked human. When we got the answer to how robotic he was in season 6, we didn't like it. It seemed like this was going to be the last we ever saw of Barry. He was defeated in combat, and then the grain silo where they'd been fighting was blown up just to make sure he was really gone. Only he really wasn't. In this episode, we see the human parts of Barry torn away, the blood and oil leaking out as we get our first real look at the Terminator-style metal skeleton sticking out underneath. Now, we're not sure how advanced his pain receptors are, but hopefully they were damaged in the explosion, because this looked pretty nasty. We're heading back to good old season 2 for this next entry, Burn Victim. We wouldn't entirely blame you if you remembered this episode more for the uncomfortable sexual scenarios than the gore, but it had more than its fair share of both.
So, does this look as bad as it looks?
Archer spends the episode trying to protect 16-year-old Anka, while also desperately trying to not be alone with her. The first attempt made on her life happens in Archer's hotel room, and he defends her with a lighter and hairspray, essentially barbecuing the attacker, but he didn't die in the blaze. The next time we see the villains, 2 of them are still plotting, while the third lies on the table, twitching and groaning in pain, his entire body covered in burns. It was gruesome to watch, but we only see a second of what must have been hours and hours of excruciating pain for the victim.
He obviously did not mean to get set on fire.
And speaking of pain that we don't get to see in its entirety, our next entry is The Last Supper, another gruesome tale from Dreamland. In this coma dream season of the show, Archer's imagination conjures up a robot version of Barry with a murderous streak. How wild of a concept is that? But this dream version of Barry goes on a murder rampage. We don't get to see any of that, we just get to see the aftermath. And trust us, that is gruesome enough. He has arranged the corpses of his victims into a twisted mockery of Da Vinci's The Last Supper. This includes people with twisted limbs, blood-spattered outfits, and more than a single instance of impalement. This is one rampage we're actually glad we didn't get to see. Now, for one we did get to see. Our bronze medal of gruesome goes to Woodhouse's Rampage. This entry is almost as shocking as it was gruesome. ISIS field agents are so constantly in the line of fire, and we're used to seeing them harm and be harmed, but it's not something that we knew to expect from sweet old Woodhouse. It was surprising enough when the premise of the episode centered around Archer's elderly valet taking part in a tontine. Still, that was nothing in comparison to the bloody rampage he commits via a flashback scene. When his beloved Captain Reginald Thistleton's plane goes down in no man's land, it's Woodhouse to the rescue. Unfortunately, he only has another minute with his dear friend before the light of the cigarette allows him to be sniped. Woodhouse is spattered in Reggie's blood, which sends him into a murderous rage. This sequence was done in a silhouette style that served to make it all the more memorable while doing nothing to shield the audience from the amount of blood on screen. It includes murder, violence, of course, loss of limb, and did we mention blood? An additional disturbing context comes from the knowledge that Woodhouse apparently scalped more than 50 people during that lapse in memory he had. His friend from the tontine confirms that there were enough human scalps to make a blanket out of, though mercifully we didn't have to see that part. The silver medal of gruesome goes to Captain Murphy's death. Captain Murphy was technically a villain, but that doesn't make his demise any less gruesome. He is crushed by a vending machine, the pressure of which seems to be holding his organs in. There's enough blood to see just how bad the damage to his lower half is without actually showing it.
I just felt my spleen slip out of what was my anus.
This is another one where a lot of the gruesome comes through with the voice work. But still, the premise carries a vending machine amount of weight as well, since this must be a terrible, not to mention slow way to pass. And finally, the gold medal of Gruesome goes to Terms of Enrampagement. Cry havoc and let slip whatever farm animals of war. It may not surprise you to learn that our most gruesome moment comes from Archer's most gruesome season, 2. And how fitting that our list both starts and ends with the breast cancer arc. While the X-ray may have been shocking to see, it was nothing in comparison to the bloodbath we were treated to shortly thereafter. Archer finds out that the life-saving cancer modification he's been spending lots and lots of money on has been replaced with sucrose pills and Zima. Knowing that he and countless other cancer patients are being swindled and potentially killed by this scam, Archer goes on the show's most violent of rampages.
Archer!
What, Lana? I said it was a rampage.
Still, though.
He threatens to put a knife up to someone's urethra. He shoots some of the Irishmen involved through the knee. He puts a knobbly smoke grenade, that just turns out to be a normal grenade, inside a man he's handcuffed to the poker table. He even gets to shoot the wheelchair-ridden mastermind of the whole plot. The icing on the cake is that he brings Lana along to memorialize the rampage, turning the whole gruesome affair into a film. Now, it's just a working title, but The Office still has to watch Terms of Enrampagement every week, and we didn't even really like seeing it once. And that's been it! Our picks for Archer moments gruesome to most gruesome. Were there any you expected to see on here and didn't? Let us know in the comments down below, as well as other videos you'd like to see from us. While you're down there, don't forget to like, subscribe, and as always, stay wicked!